ask short questions to the panelists, then you will have the floor. To the panelists, first of all, I will ask very short one, then you will take the floor. Okay? But first, I'm asking. Господин Mladenov.
Mr. Mladenov, very shortly, I will have several very brief questions to the panelists, and then I will give the floor to the audience at this conference. Why does Bulgaria believe that Bulgaria knows something today? Preposterously enough, democratic Bulgaria knows less about the Arabic world than Bulgaria a decade or 2 decades ago. I disagree with you. Bulgaria, which actually was brought to an end at the end of the 80s, knows an Arab world which no longer exists. And I believe that this is the major issue in most debates. When you talk to people, they tell you their memories about 20 or 30 years ago rather than about the realities today. People who are today with us, they represent the reality, not the people who were in power 30 years ago. While I was listening to you, I remembered something, I recalled something which defines the difficulties in our discussion today, and I would like to illustrate it in this way. We are like two women, one from Eastern Europe, the other from the Middle East, and those two women meet. The woman from the Middle East is pregnant, but is also giving birth right now. She's giving birth to her child, and she tells her Eastern European friend, she asks her, what should I do? And the Eastern European lady tells her about the childhood of her 20-year-old son. So this is basically the debate that we are having right now. There are quite a lot of lessons that we in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe have. And if we make a very long list, it can be really very, very specific, very concrete. I will give you an example. It's very important to invest in stable civil society with stable non-governmental organizations, but they will never replace political parties. Political parties also have to be supported and also have to be helped to develop. The political reform is really difficult, but it's 100 times more difficult to reform your healthcare system or pension system. There would always be radical elements who would be emerging from the margins of society and will challenge the consensus in society. If we make this long list, you will be able to find out how many lessons we learned.
Such imagination as to imagine a common European policy towards the Middle East and North Africa. Some countries like Portugal have their own experience there and maybe their own interest as well.
Yes, I really think that we cannot ignore the challenge that we face and the need to work together on that. And that's why the Middle East issue and the stability of the Middle East and the Northern Africa region is a problem of Europe and for stability and for peace in Europe in the next decades. So I'm absolutely convinced that without a strong strategic vision of our relationship in the future, how to promote cooperation and to limit confrontation in the dynamic of both margins of the Mediterranean is fundamental. And we need to do that with shared principles of political relationship, and with values and peace and security guarantees, shared principles of peace and security. And I would like to add to what Carl Bildt said, just this dimension. Certainly, this vision has to work on the political front. And we cannot ignore anymore the challenges that we face in assisting the political process of democratic transformation in those societies. We cannot do anymore, I believe. I've been saying this for some time in the Council. We cannot do what we have done in 2000 and in 2005. We cannot say democracy is the path. And then when democracy is functioning in a different way of the one we want, we don't accept the results of those elections. So we need to assist democracy, certainly on the institutional dimension, but also on the civil society dimension. But don't elude ourselves. Without economic conditions And without security conditions, you cannot sustain political transformation. And the security is something that Carl Bildt didn't add to the exhaust, comprehensive view he explained. Without peace and security guarantees involving the way we are dealing with the Libyan war and with the sensitivity of NATO and the European intervention there, and the relationship with the Arab League, with the African Union and the GCC countries is fundamental to path a common confidence framework to work on security. And don't forget the Middle East. How can you contain the spread of radicalism in democracies in Egypt, Tunisia, Syria, wherever, without facing in a very frontal way, in a very positive way, the responsibilities of the European Union to give justice to the problem of the Middle East and mainly of the Palestinian problem?
Okay. Very short question to you, George Ishak. Do you agree that revolutions eat their own children? And in that respect, how about somebody eating you in near future?
أنا شايف
We are all eating ourselves and one another. We're eating up the world, I would say. I just want to say to Mr. Carl Bildt that the demographic expansion, the demographic explosion, as you put it, means that this needs to be destroyed. We will never stop giving birth to children. The question here is how to organize this population, how to educate this population that is getting born. As Mr. Amadou said, this will need to involve institutions. In second place, the revolution in Egypt, which we intend to continue and to defend, will continue for as long as we have reached our goals. But we would like to emphasize our demands. We want to realize them. We want our demands fulfilled. Not as your foreign minister, prime minister said, that everybody should go out in the street and we should leave things as they are.
Experience in Bosnia after the war. Do you still believe that help from outside can solve major problems inside after Bosnia?
It can help, but it can't do it on its own. I mean, Europe cannot solve the problems of the Middle East. Europe cannot solve the problems of Egypt. That will have to be done by the Egyptians, that will have to be done by the peoples of the Middle East. And the responsibility was with them. That was the same with the transitions in Eastern and Central Europe. It was done by the peoples of Bulgaria and Poland and Latvia and the others. We were there to assist and help. And I think that distinction is important. Could I just add to what Luis Amadou said concerning security? Of course, there's one issue that is somewhat outside of our agenda, and I think it's good that it is outside of the agenda, but it shouldn't be entirely outside of the agenda. And that is also the Middle East peace process. It's not the immediate issue. But if there's not peace between Israel and not the Arab regimes, but the Arab peoples, then that's a time bomb that is ticking inside the different democratic systems. Because that is something that will be used by different political forces a couple of years down the road. And if you also have economic and social tensions building up, then of course it is a true time bomb. And I think we need in our diplomacy, we Europeans, the Americans, the Israelis and others to understand fully that particular dimension as well.
Said, who can steal your revolution?
Our neglect can lead that revolution slips away. I mean, any revolution in the world is a product of several political forces. The Arab revolutions of today was led mainly by urban, educated, secular middle class that were later joined by other forces. But who would win in the end? Again, it would depend on many factors. Revolutions are not about changing one dictator and replacing him with another dictator. It's about also changing political culture. Without changing the political culture and giving people education, enlightenment, then they can make the right choice, whatever they make. I mean, but they have to be educated about their choices. What is happening is that in many parts of the Middle East, if you look at why we have conflicts in the area, it has to do with the issue of state and religion relationship. Some people think that we must impose religion and particular interpretation, and this unique interpretation is not one. You will have several groups. That's why you have several groups who claim that they know religion and they want to apply it in a particular way. Those groups, under communism, you were suppressing everybody. Now, when dictatorship ended, you have all those groups emerging, and they think they can steal the show. And they are now making claims and demands. In the beginning, the Ikhwan, for example, said, in the next parliamentary election, all I want is 30%. Later, they said it would be 40%. Later, they added it would be 50%. I mean, who would stop them? They think that because they are organized and the others are not organized yet, they can steal the show. They survived only under political oppression, and that made them popular. But today, we have more enfranchising of the Egyptian voters. I have 7 to 8 million Egyptian expatriates are now permitted to vote. I have also the Coptic population, a minority, is going to be active. The average Egyptian who used to shun elections because they were rigged and not fair is now going to be interested. And they don't look at Iran or the Afghani model as something that they want to have in Egypt. This is a cosmopolitan, secular country. Historically, it was very tolerant. Most of the Egyptians for centuries were moderate. One reason you don't have the Ikhwan for 1 century, nobody is explaining why is that. For 1 century, they failed to take over. Not because, as sometimes they say, it is the state oppression, but because the Egyptians do not want this extremism. They are moderate. They want to have a middle of the road.
Thank you very much. Just to add for the protocol and for the translator that Ikhwan is the Muslim Brotherhood. Can we write a manual about stealing revolutions, Mr. Kristev?
Listen, to steal you don't need to have a manual. Basically, you should have a will. But from this point of view, I do believe that there is one thing that all revolution ends up as stolen. I don't know about any revolution that somebody does not written about it, a book about a stolen revolution. It is bad when the revolutions are devouring their children, but it's even worse when they are aborting their children. So from this point of view, I do believe that the real story is, in order to succeed, you should have unrealistic expectations. If people now in Egypt or Tunisia have realistic expectations, it's not going to help them. But if in 2 or 3 years they're going to have unrealistic expectations, this is not going to help them too. And I do believe from this point of view, the politics of expectations is also where European Union can help much. And this is probably what you're learning only by living in this. And here probably Eastern Europe can be important, not with what we did or what we didn't do, but with how we felt. But yeah, that's a different story and it needs translation.
Okay, questions. You were the first, then